Hello again, folks. I'm joined once again by Mike Flannigan. He's a wildfire expert and professor at Thompson Rivers University. And of course, I'm Kyle Brittain, weather expert, journalist, and former wildland firefighter. Today, we're going to be breaking down the incredible, unprecedented 2023 wildfire season. How much area burn did we see in Canada this year?
Well, the numbers between 16 and 18 million hectares, that's the size of the Maritimes and a little bit more. So exceptional year, crazy year. It's great to be with you, Kyle. I mean, we've been meaning to do this recap for some time, but the fire season just doesn't want to end. In fact, there's 60 some fires still burning in Alberta as we speak. It's crazy. I mean, you can see from this graph, we're in uncharted territory, exceptional. And 4% of the over 4% of the forest burned in Canada this year. It's exceptional year in any time period. There's lots of evacuations. We'll talk a bit more about that later. Emissions, the numbers are still coming in, but many times more than our fossil fuel emissions. And expenditures, insurance costs, we spent a couple $1 billion probably in fighting these fires. BC alone is approaching $1 billion. Um,
Yeah,
what can I say?
that's just incredible compared to previous years there. Even 2020. When you think of some other the bigger years in recent years, I mean, like 4 out of the last 7 in Western Canada just seems to be lots of fire out there. 2021, 2018, 2017. So it's just incredible. Here, like we had fires active. This is from July 12th, but we had fires active right across the country, like through the summer, eh?
Yeah, from sea to sea to sea. And, I've been watching fires since the late 70s, and rarely have I seen examples of fire so widespread. Sometimes the West is on fire, sometimes the East, sometimes Central, but the whole country? No, that's really strange. And not only was it a record-breaking year for Canada, record-breaking year or record-smashing year for BC, Alberta, Northwest Territories, Quebec, Nova Scotia. Incredible.
Yeah, coast to coast, and of course we had folks into the country, about 5,000 wildland firefighters from 12 different nations. And we also unfortunately had 4 firefighter fatalities this summer. These are local, Canadian, Alberta, British Columbia, I believe, maybe Northwest Territories as well. But yeah, so I mean, we had some impacts there. I think there were even 2 fatalities that were indirectly tied to the wildfires across the country too. But when you consider just the total amount of disturbance and evacuations and destruction that we saw from some of these fires, it seems pretty remarkable that there weren't more.
I mean, you look around the world and we saw what happened in Maui with, about 100 people dying, and other years in California, Australia. Are we good? Are we fortunate? I think there's a bit of both there, because, like the Fort McMurray fire could have been a real disaster. Colona, West Kelowna could have been a real disaster. Yellowknife, Fort Smith, Hay River, the town of Enterprise was essentially wiped off the map. So we're very fortunate that there weren't civilian deaths this year.
Exactly. This is I really love this graphic here. It just really gives you a sense of how long and how intense the fire seasons were per province here. It might be a little bit small on your screen there, but we got Quebec on the top here. We can see it was mainly focused throughout sort of June and July, whereas other parts of the country were just burning from like early May through late September and onward, right, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, the season started early and with a record-breaking heat wave in the West. And, the Northwest Territories was on fire in May. Typically, there's still a lot of snow in much of the Northwest Territories in May, and their fire season typically doesn't start until July. So early start, and it just didn't stop in some of the places out west. And, we'll talk a bit more about Quebec, but, northern Quebec does see a lot of fire. But this year we saw fires more south central Quebec, which is very unusual. And, that's their intensive forest management zone. And so, yeah, it was really quite a surprise.
For sure. And so it looks like, I mean, 50, it says we got 15 of the largest fires are responsible for half the total area burned. These are some great graphics here for some great slides, courtesy Natural Resource Canada. But yeah, that's just an incredible amount. You can see compared to 5 fires over 500,000 hectares this year. I mean, that's incredible.
That's close to the size of Prince Edward Island. And, this is not surprising in that, you know, for fires over 200 hectares, they are responsible for 97% of the area burned in Canada. So the big fires dominate. And much of this happens on a relatively small number of days of extreme fire weather. Those hot, dry, windy days, they really drive the fire world. And they drive the big fires too. Even though some of these lasted, 100 days or longer, much of the growth were on those hot, dry, windy days. And we saw a lot of them this year.
Yeah, just fits and starts. It's incredible. We'll look at a couple cases later on, and it just really get a sense of how much wind is really the main driver of these fires. Because we have all that sort of background. The fuels are primed and everything. We'll talk a little bit more about that now, actually. So, what is exactly the reason that we saw such an active wildfire season this year, with like upwards of 4% of our total forest area in the country that burned this year? What was the reason for that?
Well, as the slide shows, the snow left early with that early heat wave, uh, ongoing drought through much of Canada. We'll show you a map of the situation currently, but it was like that much of the year. Extreme fire weather, those hot, dry, windy days, we saw a lot of them. We call them spread days. And these are the days that fires can actively spread. And it was the hottest summer on record. And this relationship between temperature and fire is a critical one. The warmer we get, the longer the fire seasons are. We saw that. The more lightning we see, and the more lightning cause fires. And we'll talk about that in a few slides. And it means the fuels are drier because the higher temperatures are really efficient at sucking the moisture out of the fuel.
Yeah. And perhaps a contributor to why other parts of the world, like you mentioned, there was Maui. We had much of the Mediterranean region, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece had some really bad wildfires this year too.
Algeria,
yeah,
lots of
exactly.
deaths in Algeria.
Incredible. Yeah. So speaking of ignitions, we're talking about the cause of these fires, and we compare human cause and lightning cause. Of course, human cause typically tends to be accidental in nature. So, ATVs cruising around in the bush, power lines, perhaps improperly discarded cigarette butts, or, extinguished campfires and things like that. Lightning, of course, is also another major cause for fire across the country. This year we had 59% of all fires were lightning caused, which seems a little bit higher than normal, resulting in 93% of area burned. So how does that compare to our typical ratio of lightning versus human caused?
Typically, we're close to 50-50. Matter of fact, humans are a little bit over 50 and lightning a little bit under 50 for Canada. It varies geographically, but this year, yeah, lightning caused fires kind of dominate. And we can see that in, that's south central Quebec, we don't normally see that many fires started by lightning. So that it was unusual. And it's also the timing of those fires being in early June was also unusual. So, and you can see, how widespread from, pretty well the Arctic Ocean to Pacific Ocean. It does slow down as you start getting to the Atlantic Ocean. But yeah, lightning caused fires are a big player in our fire situation in Canada. And that's concerning because we can do things to prevent human caused fires, but we can't do anything about the lightning caused fires until we deal with climate change as a global society.
Right. And so many of these lightning fires tend to be very remote. And so with extreme fire danger already on the landscape, and with the intense fire weather days, and with maybe lots of fires already ongoing, it's really hard to sort of action these fires, especially if you're a wildland fire crew. If there's already lots of resources committed to other fires, and then you have one of these like incredible, burning days, maybe you get a rash of thunderstorms, and these fires tend to be out in the middle of nowhere, and they can get really big really quickly before you can get to them.
Well, and some people may not realize that in many jurisdictions, and fire management is the responsibility of the landowner, the provinces, the territories, the national parks. Some of these fires are monitored, i.e., they're allowed to burn and are not extinguished. And they generate a lot of smoke, which can cause some real problems. And, I dealt with a lot of questions from American media. Why aren't you putting these fires out? I said, well, fire is natural. And many agencies allow these fires to burn as long as they're not threatening communities or critical infrastructure.
And that's a really important point too, to realize that, wildfire is ubiquitous to the boreal forest, which spans, the circumboreal forest. It spans the northern hemisphere from Siberia through northern Canada and everything like that. So, I mean, wildfire is actually a good thing for the regeneration of the forest. So, typically, we have to keep that in perspective, as well as a lot of times, wildfire is always portrayed in a really negative light, but it's actually a really good thing in certain cases, right?
Absolutely.
Another marker of the incredible nature of this wildfire season, we had 142 separate pyrocumulonimbus events in Canada this season. This is a pyrocumulonimbus cloud. You can see it's a fire-generated thunderstorm. Just generates tremendous amounts of energy from these intensely burning wildfires. We have extreme fire weather conditions here. This was in June 29th, 2021 in Savannah, BC. It was about 40 degrees when I took this image. This is at 8 or 9 in the evening, and of course the upper air pattern that we had in place was kind of favorable for the development of these massive convective columns. So I mean, just incredible to see these fire generated thunderstorms. These tops are going way up there. They're getting into the lower stratosphere at times. Temperatures minus 38 or colder by definition. So yeah, I mean, tell us a little bit more about what happened with those piracy bees across the country this year.
So it was a record-breaking year for pyro-CBs as well. The previous global record was just around 100 pyro-CBs, and here we are at 142. The previous record for Canada for pyro-CBs was 50 in 2021, and here we are at 142. And these are monsters. They can generate lightning, they can start new fire, and if this is the Sparks Lake Pyro-CB, which I think it is, it started about 40 fires downwind from this fire, so it self-perpetuates. Fort McMurray also had Pyro-CBs that started new fires. They're dangerous situations for firefighters, and if a community's in the path, time to evacuate. There's not much we can do to stop these guys until they run out of fuel or the weather changes.
Yeah, exactly. As a wildland firefighter, it was among fire crews, sometimes you'd call them ABC fires, armchair, binoculars, camera, because you just sit back and let nature run its course, because it's very humbling. You can't get anywhere near fire on the ground. There's other indirect attack methods that you would typically try to, maybe you'd conduct burnouts or cut, fuel breaks and whatnot. But I mean, you can't get anywhere near fire that generates a cloud like this. Of course, we had a lot of smoke getting coughed up into the atmosphere this year. Horrific air quality for just plaguing much of Western Canada through the summer months. Smoke hours are, so typically measured between May 1st, September 30th. You need to have 10 kilometers of visibility or less in wildfire smoke as observed by a human observer at a weather station. So some of the stations across the country, they're just reporting incredible amounts of smoke hours, like Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, 1,263. And actually, if you include the October total, it's up to 1,319 hours, which is, the 1,263 value there. That's over 52 days of continuous wildfire smoke. And of course, records set for smoke duration in other cities as well. Calgary, 512 hours, just horrible air quality across Western Canada this summer.
Yeah, and you said October. Yes, that fire season just didn't want to end, and there's still fires burning, and some of these will burn through the winter in the organic material, peat moss, and because of the drought, it's more likely we'll see a fair number of these burn through the winter.
For sure. Let's break down some of the more kind of defining events of the season. This is kind of where it all started out. May 5th, 2023. You're looking at Alberta here. This is courtesy CIRA. And we can see clusters of wildfires here taking off in the Swan Hills region, and then areas kind of between Rocky Mountain House and Edson, central Alberta foothills. That area doesn't tend to burn as often as the northern boreal region, but I mean, man, did it take off this year. And there were a few days where, just the really wind-driven days that they went big. We can see even some pyroconvection, deep convection, perhaps a pyro-CB events there on that day as well. I was out in the field, kind of on the southern fringes of these fires down here. southeast of Edson. Incredible wind-driven fire behavior that day, and that just really kicked off the season.
Yeah, Kyle, you can tell it's really windy because the length of the smoke plume versus the width of it is long and narrow, and that's an indication of a very strong wind. And you were on the ground, and you can probably confirm it was very windy.
Yeah, and just like we can see with the shape of that smoke plume, we can also see, that the fire burn patterns also tend to be, they were very linear, long, narrow burn patterns that day. So the fire behavior, at least for our purposes, documenting these fires on the ground, it was somewhat predictable, the spread on the ground. You still have to keep your head on a swivel, obviously, anytime you get anywhere near these fires. I don't recommend anyone going to get anywhere near a wildfire. As a former wildland firefighter, I had, a few tactics up my sleeve for getting near these things, but certainly you're keeping your head on a swivel. You can just see by the shape of this smoke plume here that it's extremely wind driven. And of course, this was coinciding with spring dip. We can see actually green up was occurring. Looks like it was happening a little early following that kind of hot spell at the end of April there. But I mean, still, you can see the ground cover here is just brown and crunchy. And of course, there's not much in the way of moisture up in these trees here. So they just burned incredibly. And with the wind pushing them through the upper canopy of the forest, we had high intensity fires.
Yeah, it's quite a photo, and you had some good video from that on your YouTube channel.
Yeah, that was an incredible day, May 5th. And then later in the month, May 13th to 13th to 15th as well was another big burning period there. Transitioning to June 3rd, this image is from Sierra as well. This is what you're looking at here is South Central Quebec. Those fires we were talking about earlier, they all kind of took off on the 3rd. The lightning that was responsible for triggering them occurred back on the 1st, but with a couple of days of fire weather, they really just suddenly popped up. There wasn't even drought ongoing in this area, right, Mike?
No, it wasn't droughty at that time. And, to see so many lightning caused fires, in June in that part of Quebec. In fact, the area burned from these fires in 2023 was more than the previous 25 years in this part of Quebec. So once again, exceptional situation and an exceptional year.
Just incredible watching those all take off at once. Like there was a lot of conspiracies kind of floating around when you suddenly see all these fires just pop up. And of course, within a couple days after these fires took off, they really kind of started to consume a lot of forest areas. So like June 5th and 6th, we saw two tremendous burning periods. And then these would go on to generate just massive pall of smoke that would kind of advect or travel southward around this massive upper low to the east. It kind of pushed the smoke southward into, the millions of people into eastern Canada, Ottawa, Montreal, down the eastern seaboard of the U.S., New York City, of course, we can see here, June 6th and 7th, they got smoked out through this area here. And of course, it darkened skies. It just ruined air quality. It was really incredible.
Postponed baseball games. There was about 100 million people impacted by this smoke. And the more we know about smoke, the more we realize how hazardous it is for human health. And of course, this is when, my email, my phone, we're going crazy with American media saying, what's going on? Why aren't these fires going out? And yeah, well, where there's fire, there's smoke.
Yeah, exactly. And it's amazing what happens when, smoke drifts over the capital cities. The nation's capitals, they don't typically get as much smoke as we're used to getting out west here. So,
well, and the thing is, if you're downtown New York or downtown Toronto, the likelihood of your place burning down is essentially zero. Okay?
right.
But your quality of life can be impacted for weeks by smoke from a fire 1,000 kilometers away. So yeah, there's direct impacts from fire and then the indirect impacts, which can be substantial.
We were all in on it this year, unfortunately. September 22nd, perhaps the most incredible day of the year, in my opinion. This is what you're looking at here is Northeast British Columbia, Northwest Alberta, southern part of Northwest Territories there. Largest single burning day in the whole summer. I mean, we had close to about 700,000 hectares burned, at least per hotspot imagery. And you can see also pyrocumulonimbus here, several here, erupting and just generating a tremendous amount of smoke that would end up getting kind of caught up in the jet stream and traveling pretty far. But this event sort of mimicked the infamous 1950 Chinchaga firestorm, which occurred in a very similar area around almost the same time of the year. Wind-driven event that occurred in this area here that had some similar downstream effects, hey?
Yeah, it does remind you of the. I wasn't around in 1950. I'm old, but I'm not that old. Uh, yeah, the smoke that traveled, and you mentioned it was the biggest area burn day of 2023. It's actually the biggest area burn day on record. These kind of records only go back to about 2001, but once again, exceptional day, and it's towards the end of September. This image you're seeing now is, from the geostationary satellite, and it's the 3.9 micron channel, which is very sensitive to temperatures around 1,000 degrees, which is close to what you see for a forest fire. And you can see those white areas, and you see that those black kind of plumes coming from those white areas. That's pyroconvection going on because it's got moisture from the water vapor. And so that gives it that dark. And then you can see even over Great Slave Lake, the higher temperatures, that's pulses of these pyro-CBs. I was watching this, just unbelievable, just crazy. And, I have colleagues and friends in Fort Nelson. They were concerned. And actually, she was in Hay River fighting the fire because she leads an Indigenous fire crew, and just being evacuated out of Hay River, and just the situation going on there was just scary.
Definitely. This is just a quick GIF of that smoke traveling from the 22nd when it first burned across, getting caught up in the jet stream. You can see it here. It ends up by the 25th over Greenland, and then over the Maritime provinces about 5 days later. And we saw some really incredible imagery coming out of those areas. I don't know if you wanted to mention anything about that last graphic there, Mike.
Just that the smoke ends up going to Europe, and getting reports from Portugal, UK about smoke. Just crazy. It can travel around the globe.
So, some of the images coming up on Twitter from Orla Jolson from Nuuk, Greenland, about 3 days after that, just blackened the skies there. So like the Chinchaga firestorm, where, if imagine social media had been around in 1950, people in Southern Ontario being like, what the heck? Is this the end of the world? Why is it black in the middle of the day? Like, can't figure it out. Like, this is incredible.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other interesting thing that we saw was the sun turning a very, anyone who's seen smoky skies, typically the sun is whitish, yellowish, red, orangey looking, but to have these like lavender colors or even blue suns were reported with the Chinchaga firestorm. These are those shorter wavelengths of light. Basically, all that's happening there is you have several days for, and you can see here, this is in the UK around the same time, because some of that smoke plume did go off to the east. Some stayed here into the Maritime provinces. Some quickly traveled across the pond. But around the same time, about 5 days after the fire, we were seeing these sort of purpley lavender colored suns in the sky. And that's the result of basically, you have several days for the larger particles to fall out. You have a high concentration of smoke particles that are still suspended in the air of a very similar size. And that basically just causes the light to be scattered in a certain way. You have like the shorter wavelengths, the blues and the violets that get to our eyes. And so that is just kind of a sign of this incredible nature of this wildfire event on the 22nd September. So we had obviously a lot of evacuations across the country. Do you figure it was probably the worst year in terms of overall evacuations?
Number one, yes, by far. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
we had
close.
Yellowknife and Colona almost the same time. That's August 16th, 17th, 18th time frame, being evacuated from these wildfires.
Yeah, widespread evacuation. There was over 200 communities evacuated this fire season, and I think that is the highest number I've ever seen. And you can see quite a trend in that graph. And this once again is from Natural Resources Canada. This is from a talk that Dr. Push Jane presented recently, and just going up and up and up.
Yeah, for sure. Even so, you can see 2016, like pretty much all of Fort McMurray evacuated 88,000. This year, though, we had, Yellowknife, West Kelowna, Halifax, Kelowna, Edson, just as some of the larger communities that were evacuated. Just incredible. Okay, so here we can see also this this graphic from NASA. We can see Yellowknife here in the center, sort of the image here, and fires burning off to the north and to the west. And of course, we that was, we had the evacuations occurring en masse there. To have the whole, northern capital city of Yellowknife evacuated, it's pretty remarkable. Here in Kelowna as well, on August 17th. There were numerous big wildfires burning across the southern interior, but this was the big day that was, we were expecting. Saw the cold front coming down. It was hot and windy out ahead. Very classic kind of wildfire spread situation. And this fire, of course, quickly, moved down the hill slope here. It was blowing burning embers and causing spot fires out ahead of it. The fetch of Lake Okanagan, about 2 kilometers wide here. And then, of course, the city of Kelowna just across the other side. That's Knox Mountain over there, where I was eventually watching the fire come from. But that was a remarkable event as well there in Kelowna, hey?
Yeah, I have family in Colona, and I said, they're on the east side of the lake. I said, you're safe. Fires never jump Lake Okanagan. Well, I was wrong. One of the surprises of 2023, and my nephew's place, he had to be evacuated because of spot fires, jumping probably at least 2.5 to 3 kilometers, because some of the spot fires weren't right at the shore.
Right.
And there's suggestion there's some pyroconvection with this. That's, I have friends investigating this situation and looking at the homes that were lost and the homes that were not lost, and what were some of the features that contributed to home loss.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, I mean, it seems to both those fires where you have like they're wind driven, but there's such strong convection over the fires, that sort of combination. You get that strong lift in that convective column that can kind of loft these larger burning embers, pine cones, tree branches, bark, whatever, and they can just float across in that convective column. And yeah, they did. There were, I think there were at least 2 spots on the east side of Okanagan Lake where new fires started there. It was a pretty scary night for residents in central Okanagan.
Reminiscent of 2003 with, um, where there was significant structure loss, home loss in 2003 fire in Kelowna.
Yeah. The wildland urban interface, these folks here in the southern interior, they're no stranger. I mean, 2009 as well, West Kelowna. This seems to be recurring like at least once or twice a decade. What we're going to be seeing, though, into 2024, we're currently seeing El Nino conditions persisting, and strong El Nino actually, and they're forecast to continue through the rest of kind of the heart of the winter before dropping off into at least neutral by late in the spring. But that means, of course, we're going to continue seeing these impacts of this strong El Nino, which, we're seeing record-breaking warmth and dry conditions persisting. And of course, we have ongoing dry conditions, and it's continuing through the winter. So I do fear, Mike, that we are kind of setting up. We're kind of getting those antecedent conditions that say like 2015, 2016 was the last sort of time this type of thing happened, which of course, May 2016, we saw the Fort McMurray wildfire. We had just those, dry conditions and a warm winter. It can really kind of set us up for a problematic spring, couldn't it?
Yeah, it reminds me of 97, 98 as well. And, it doesn't guarantee, a busy spring, but the dice are loaded. The odds are we could have a very active spring fire season. And, now you've shown us, the temperature anomalies for January through June. And this is very scary. Yes, you have to take this with a lot of salt. These are seasonal forecasts, and sometimes they're wrong. But if it comes anywhere close to this, it's going to be a very active spring. It will depend on the day-to-day weather and the ignitions. And once again, human-caused fires are preventable. So, and that's the major cause of fires in May for Alberta. And May is the busiest month in Alberta. So if we can, use fire bans, forest closures, education to keep those numbers, those fire starts down, that goes a long way. But this is a very scary scenario.
And it seems like, because the spring dip, that really dry period, it may mean if we have a really dry, warm, anomalously warm April, for instance, we could start fire season, which is typically May. We could start it well earlier, like intense fire behavior earlier if we do get, an early heat wave or something like that. So it does seem, unfortunately, that, with the current trend, and of course, one huge precipitation event could change this all. But at this juncture, it looks like, we'll probably, you know, rainy season in Alberta is June and onward, and we do tend to see a lot of summers following El Nino winters. It does tend to turn a little bit wet in Alberta, not all the time, but quite often. But we will probably sneak in our wildfire season before that happens anyway, because it tends to be in April, into May rather. So, we're going to have to really watch that sort of latter half of April through May into the first half of June timeframe, at least as we get into 2024, if this continues. Especially given this is from the North American Drought Monitor, we can see just how much of Canada is dealing with drought at the moment. A lot of the forested, the boreal forest regions in the country, of course, where we saw the worst of the wildfires in 2023 in that Northeast BC, Northern Alberta, Southern Northwest Territories there, still dry, and fires are still smoldering there. And I would imagine that as soon as it starts to get hot there in the spring, those ones are going to the ones that are still burning are going to take off again. And that's, in addition to the ones that could be started. I mean, it looks like central Alberta, we got some rain through the summer. It kept things a little bit cooler there, but very dry there through much of the boreal. So, we're going to have to watch for those hot spells and the hot, dry, windy weather through late April into June, eh?
Yeah, let's hope the June monsoon arrives this year. We're in 2024. And until then, even through winter, grass fires can be an issue. And we saw a grass fire near Airdrie not that long ago. And grass fires can be dangerous. They can kill people. They can burn your home down. So yeah, if we continue with this mild, dry weather we've been seeing over much of Western Canada, watch out for grass fires.
Yeah, definitely. Really need that June monsoon to kick in, because you can see like southern Alberta there. That's, extreme and exceptional drought. That's going to be really hard on the agricultural sector as well. And of course, in the Rockies, we've got a lot of, I mean, that's upstream of our major cities across Alberta and the prairies. We're going to be potentially seeing water shortages in 2024 we already are in some regions, but we really, really need a good, soaking rain. I'll take 2 summers of soaking rain at this point. But yeah, so I mean, that's basically going to be it for our discussion on the fires this year. Let's get together again in spring, and maybe in a few months to kind of talk about what could be coming up next, eh?
Yeah, let's talk in spring and see how things are shaping up.
Sounds great. Thanks a lot, Mike. Thanks. Appreciate your expertise as always, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, my pleasure.